On today's episode, Elon reveals new information about the Cybertruck, a Model 3 Highland prototype might have been spotted in the wild, and the FCC grants Starlink V2 a license, with some strange conditions. Let's get going. Tesla's latest product release event may have been all about the new Semi, but Elon made sure to also drop an Easter egg or two about the upcoming Cybertruck and how it will work with the new megawatt-powered Supercharger. The launch event covered Tesla Semi specs and testing, industry metrics, and a breakdown of the new V4 Supercharger, with the announcement that the Cybertruck would be using this system as well. The new V4 Supercharger has been anticipated by Tesla fans since a Tesla semi-charging station was spotted at the Frito-Lay plant in Modesto around July this year. Back then, it still wasn't clear if the V4 was a separate piece of equipment from the Semi's megacharger, and while there was some guesses about capabilities of this new equipment, we didn't have a clear picture of how this fits into the Tesla roadmap. In the delivery event presentation, the senior manager of semi-truck engineering, Dan Preetzley, described the system in more detail. How the cable is liquid-cooled to allow for a slimmer size, how the coolant is cycled back through the conductor tubes, which immerses the high-voltage wire in coolant so it can reach extreme capacity in the same space that the V3 charging cable has. To give you all a bit of context, the current V3 charging cables have a charging output of up to 250 kilowatts. Priestley says the new V4 charging cable can do 1 megawatt DC. Having a cable that's able to output over 4 times more than the V3 makes sense for the Semi. We don't know its exact battery capacity yet, likely around 900 kilowatt hours, but we know that the Semi can go 500 miles fully loaded on a single charge. And that means if a driver wants to charge their electric Tesla tractor, they'll need a quick charging system to avoid hours of downtime. The surprise is really in the Cybertruck being fitted for the system as well. We haven't really had any confirmation of what size of battery is going to be in the Cybertruck when it goes into production in 2023. We have had some hints from executives and some paperwork about a new battery equipment line at the Fremont factory labeled CTA Battery B Build back in August 2022. So we can be relatively sure that Tesla is at least aiming to equip the truck with their 4680 battery. What's also interesting is that the Semi was revealed to be Tesla's first high-voltage electric powertrain architecture, moving up to 1,000 volts. Previously, every other Tesla has run on a 400-volt system. This use of a higher voltage in the electronics allows for lower resistance in the system, and that equals faster charging capability. It's a technology that has already been adopted by some of Tesla's competitors. Porsche runs their Taycan at 800 volts, and the Lucid Air takes that up to 900 volts. So, if the Cybertruck is going to be able to fast charge at 1 megawatt, like the Semi, then it would be reasonable to assume that the Cybertruck will run on the same 1,000 volt electronic system. If this can recharge 70% of the Semi's extra large battery pack in 30 minutes, then it could likely charge a Cybertruck to full in the same time period. And that is going to be super handy for anyone who wants to tow with a Cybertruck. Of course, improving charging speeds is something that Tesla is probably looking to do for every one of their vehicles, so it could just be that they saw the opportunity to build the Cybertruck to use the new V4 Superchargers, and they took it. Whatever the reason, the new charger is a really cool piece of tech, and it's encouraging to hear that it's going to be used for more than just the Semi. The V4 system is due to begin rolling out to Tesla's Supercharger network in 2023, which is great timing considering Tesla open-sourced their charge adapter specs in a push to become the North American standard in charging tech. The new V4 would be a huge point in their favor with that effort. And with the rumored refresh of the Model 3 happening next year, maybe we'll see another vehicle added to that list. Learning a new language can be very difficult, especially if you don't have the proper tools or teachers, which is why we are excited to partner with Babbel, the best language learning app in the world with over 10 million subscriptions. Not knowing the language makes traveling much more difficult while adding stress, so I'm not making that mistake again. The next time I go to Mexico, I know it'll be even more enjoyable away from the tourist attractions, knowing that I can confidently communicate with the locals without having to rely on someone else to translate. My favorite part about Mexico was visiting a few of the local cenotes, and I can't wait to go back and visit a few more. So I want to be able to ask the locals which cenotes they recommend by saying, "Tienes alguna recomendación de cenotes?" which translates to, "Do you have any cenote recommendations?" If you've never been in a cenote before, I highly recommend it if you ever visit Mexico. They have over 6,000 natural cenotes in Mexico, so you'll never run out of options to explore. I didn't know any Spanish on my first trip, but I won't be making that mistake again. Learning a new language isn't just for traveling though, it's also a great way to better connect with relatives or meet new people. Let us know in the comments section which language you would like to learn, and after that, you can get 60% off your subscription by clicking on our custom link found in the description and signing up for Babbel. And if you're looking for a holiday gift for a friend or family member, you can gift a Babbel subscription. There are multiple subscription plans, including my favorite, the lifetime subscription, where you'll get access to all the languages forever. SpaceX has finally received a license from the U.S. Federal Communications Commission to launch and operate their new Starlink V2 satellites. But it's not exactly a cause for celebration. The long-awaited FCC grant has been in the works since May of 2020. And while SpaceX applied for a license to launch almost 30,000 units, the FCC has only allowed for 7,500 and will defer licensing the rest of the requested satellites until further review and coordination with federal users. That is a huge blow for SpaceX, who has been building their platform toward the goal of upgrading their Starlink constellation to the new model, even outfitting their prototype starships with dispenser devices made specifically for the V2 satellite. As usual, the FCC didn't give much information as to how they arrived at this number of satellites, but their brief mentions several factors that went into the deliberations, some of which are very strange. However, the biggest recurring issue that the FCC seems worried about is reducing the number of satellites in orbit. The issue of orbital clutter has gotten a lot of attention in the past year or so, spurred on by events like the November 2021 Russia anti-satellite test that destroyed one of their old orbital units and caused months of near misses with the International Space Station. Launch debris has also spurred calls for regulation. Most of us probably remember China haphazardly deorbiting 2 of their Long March boosters over populated areas in 2021 and in November this year. But more and more countries and launch startups are putting vehicles into space and adding to the amount of traffic and debris. And the US government has been making an effort this year to study and curb the use of mega constellations in an effort to ease this strain on our orbit. In September this year, the FCC itself pledged to modernize the rules on space junk in response to the Russian satellite incident, as well as complaints from astronomers who warned against increasingly large amounts of satellite constellations as the objects interfered with observations and the search for potentially dangerous asteroids. So, the orbital clutter issue is the most likely reason for the additional time spent on licensing the Starlink V2, as well as the very restrictive number of allowed units. It also handily explains why the FCC allowed for less V2 satellites than their 2018 authorization for 7,518 Starlink Gen 1.5 units. In that instance, the FCC had taken only 5 months to process, but that was with a satellite that was already in regular use and well before the extra scrutiny on orbital clutter. However, SpaceX has already gone to some effort to reduce concerns in these areas. Back in 2019, the company began testing to see if they could reduce the reflectivity of their Starlink satellites, and they began setting lower altitudes to help with the clutter issue. The FCC has been curbing the use of constellations above 1,000 kilometers because at that altitude, it could take satellites hundreds of years to deorbit. Meanwhile, the majority of SpaceX's requests for deployment zones has been around the 600 to 340 kilometer mark, meaning any failed satellites would take under 5 years to deorbit, which is what the FCC is targeting as of September this year. And if the FCC was just being careful in how they apply their new protocols for constellations, that would be understandable. But there's a bit in the FCC ruling that is troubling. When referencing the decision to cut the Starlink V2 numbers down to a fraction while they do more research, the FCC openly states that they made their decision based on a letter from Amazon's Project Kuiper, the Amazon Mega Constellation project, which is a direct competitor to SpaceX. The 3-page letter expresses concern over not just the sheer number of satellites SpaceX wants to put up, but that it doesn't allow for much room for other companies to put up their satellites in FCC-compliant orbits. The letter goes on to suggest a number of options for solving this issue, including the reduction in satellites which the FCC went with. And there are actually some good points here. If this letter had come from NASA or an independent source, it would be much less problematic. But it's not a great sign that the FCC is taking recommendations from a competing company rather than an independent entity. And the strangeness doesn't stop there. Included in the partial grant is an arbitrary metric that could force SpaceX to cease satellite deployment if the total deorbit time of any failed satellites in this proposed constellation reaches 100 years, which means if just 20 satellites fail at an average altitude of 500 kilometers, SpaceX would be forced to stop deploying their constellation until the FCC has time to review the sources of failure. This extremely draconian rule reportedly comes from a third-party company called Leo Labs, which is a radar tracking service for low Earth orbit objects. Now, to be fair, getting metrics from a company like Leo Labs is less strange than going to a SpaceX competitor, but the current run of Starlink satellites have had about a 3% failure rate as satellites become unresponsive and begin to deorbit, which is relatively low for industry standards. But if that trend holds with this 7,500 Starlink V2 batch, the attrition would be around 255 units, and SpaceX would have to halt before even finishing this batch. Now, it's hard to say where the FCC and SpaceX will go from here. SpaceX is really relying on Starlink V2 to upgrade their coverage in the coming years, and it does represent a huge investment. SpaceX isn't a stranger to working with the FCC, so maybe they can get some wiggle room in the future. Not long after last week's buzz about a rumored refresh of the Tesla Model 3, a Twitter user out in Santa Cruz, California, spotted a Model 3 prototype sporting some modesty wraps. The video and images from user @OMG_Tesla show a white Model 3 with its front and rear ends covered with fabric that specifically hides the shape of the lights and the body shape, suggesting that there have been some changes to those areas that aren't ready to be shown off just yet. Some keen-eyed people in the replies also noticed that the area around the headlights was just sheer enough to make out the lines of what might be a new camera module a little higher up the assembly. A camera there would help eliminate a known blind spot in that area, so it could certainly be that. Just last week, on November 28th, news outlet Reuters reported on a leak of a Model 3 redesign project called Highland from their sources close to Tesla. The report indicated that the vehicle would be going through a process of reducing the number of components involved in its manufacturing, the complexity of its interior, and that some focus would be on the infotainment display. A similar refresh of design was applied to the Model S in 2021, with attention paid to a number of areas, including bringing the headlights and taillights up to current Tesla standards. It's hard not to think of that when seeing the lights being obscured on this Model 3 prototype. But the Reuters report also indicated that production of the new Model 3 was likely to begin in Shanghai and the Fremont factory in California sometime in the third quarter of 2023. And Santa Cruz is only about an hour away from the Fremont factory. We can't see anything more from the photos, but what's really interesting is seeing a Model 3 prototype in the wild so soon after the Reuters leak. it certainly fits the timeline, so maybe we'll be seeing an uncovered version in the near future. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up today if you liked it. That is so important for getting our content out to more people. If you enjoy the content, then you'd probably also enjoy our weekly newsletter, so sign up with the link down below at theteslaspace.com. A huge thank you to all of our Patreon supporters who are listed on the screen now. You help us make the best content we can, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.